Fjord's Woodshop is sponsored by Minimax and by I Would Like. Check out their products at iwouldlike.com. Okay, so that's the top pretty much finished. Obviously we need to finish it with sanding and getting the edges and stuff looking good, but it's time to move on to the base. So the idea I have is a fairly low table for this, so about 350, 360 mil tall. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sketch it all out on this piece of MDF here so we have a one-to-one drawing for all the cuts. I've striked a line which is the height I want for this table, and then this line here is the width I'm looking for, which is 590, so that will give us a pretty good overhang. Okay, so this is enough for me to actually go on. So while everything's not exactly perfect, it's close enough for me to get all the angles and all the pieces I need. So I'm going to cut 4 legs, 2 lower stretchers, I guess you'd call it, or rails, and then also the long stretcher just to the same thickness as this, which is 55 mil. So that's all rough sawn, so we'll cut it all down using the miter saw, mill it up using the thicknesser and jointer, and then get cutting the angles at the table saw. Alright, so with all of that now milled down to be square and parallel, I'm now going to cut it down to its final size using the table saw and add the angles. So that's all of the angles cut into these pieces. The last thing we got to do is just add the taper to these legs. So on this leg down here, I've traced the taper that we need, so I'm going to make a simple tapering jig at the table saw, which we can cut all of these to. To make this tapering jig, it's super simple. All you need is a scrap bit of sheet goods, so I've got MDF here, plywood would work just as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to rip it so it has zero clearance in that blade. Okay, so from there we just need to actually mark, pretty much on the workpiece as you can see, our piece. So on here, I've traced the outline, this is the offcut, and then on the end grain, I've just put these little tick marks. Now I'm going to line those tick marks up to the side of this piece of MDF. And when those 2 tick marks are both on the edge, we know if we made a fence on the MDF to match that profile, we're going to be left with the perfect piece. Now the glue I'm using is just super glue or CA glue. And zip kicker, so this is just an instant set. Using the instant set, it just means that I can actually build this jig in 2 minutes flat and be using it. Okay, and that is essentially the tapering jig built, so it's just a temporary fence. Now, there are tapering jigs you can buy, but for me, I've always got scraps of MDF and all these offcuts laying around. So this is actually easier, and I get a much nicer result with less mucking around because the lines are kind of there as a guide. So we'll cut all of these tapers. Okay, so there it is. We'll add a couple of dominoes. We'll do that now, glue it up, and then once that's dry, we'll be able to make this table look like a finished table. Okay, so I'll let those dry overnight, and I just quickly sent them through the sander just to get rid of any glue. The bottoms aren't quite straight, so I'm here at my long edge sander. I'm just going to sand them to be nice and flat, and then we'll trim this at the table saw to make sure that these 2 points are parallel to the bottom. Okay, so that's pretty much the idea of the table. The only thing that's missing is our center rail here. And for the joinery on that, we're just going to do a half lap. So we'll figure out the exact spacing we want here, cut a piece to be the same outline, and then we'll cut the half laps in both those pieces. But first, we've got to mill up a piece which is the same thickness as these rails down the bottom and the correct length. So to figure out the length of our rail, I've marked on the workpiece here where I want these legs to be exactly, which is there. In there, and then with this nice long ruler we can just measure, and there we go. We want it to be 985 millimeters long, and as far as the dimension of the workpiece, it's just going to be the same thickness of these rails, which I know is 55 millimeters. Okay, and then to mark out all the joints, I'm just using my marking knife or cutting gauge, I should say. So I want the actual half lap of this piece is going to be slightly oversized. So this is cut about 2 millimeters too long. So I'm setting the depth just a hair over the width of the rail, which is there. And then on 3 faces, I'll be marking that. I don't want the tongue to go all the way through. I actually want it to be only about 20 mil, roughly. So I'll then approximately okay, now we'll nibble away all of that waste at the table saw. Got the miter bar, which is set to dead 90 at the blade. The blade is set to dead 90 to the table, and the fence is also set to the same distance as this line to here, so what we marked earlier. So the fence is kind of a stop block, and as this isn't a through cut, so in other words there's not going to be an off cut, this is still safe to run the workpiece along. The other thing I've got is the blade is set to the same depth as our notch is going to be, so it's just a hair below, so we'll clean that up using the block plane. The only thing we have to remember is this is the face that's up, because if we move that around, we're going to cut it all in the wrong position. Okay, so cutting the notch into the leg assembly itself is pretty simple. We're going to use a router with a jig. So what I've got here is a piece of MDF which I've glued and screwed together to make a little L-shaped bracket. But essentially all we're going to do is we're going to cut a notch out of this, which fits this material here perfectly. So we can use a router with a flush trim bit to remove all of this material. So to do that, I use the table saw. Okay, so that's that done. Don't worry about that shape, but I actually made it so it was just a hair too loose now. So annoying, but not the end of the world, because what we can do is with this iron-on edge banding, I'll just put a bit in there, make sure that's nice and tight down there, fill in this bottom section, and that should be a nice snug fit. If it's still too loose, we can also pack it with masking tape. So obviously with this gap, we're not going to get an iron in there because it's too narrow. So what I use is a heat gun. I heat it up so the glue melts, and then I just use an offcut to really press it down, and that feels like it's got pretty good adhesion. So I've got my router set up with a pattern bit. You can see it's got a bearing there. And essentially, I've marked on here with a knife the exact location of the stretcher, so dead center. So I line those up. Now that's our zero clearance plate, and then with our router, we just hog out the material, going deeper and deeper until we're at the correct depth, which is the thickness of our tenons here. So I'll do that. Okay, so that could do us, but I'm going to make this a fully housed lap joint, so that just means that it's also housed on the sides here. So I'll flip the leg down, and then using the template, just as before, we're going to route in a slightly shallower recess, so probably only about 1 or 2 millimeters deep, but it's just enough to reinforce the joint a little bit more, and then if there is any discrepancies, the shoulders will hide it. So even if the joint doesn't close up perfectly on that shoulder, no one will ever know. Okay. Cool, and this is probably going to be the easiest glue up I've done in a while, as it's just putting glue on the joint and clamping it at a 90-degree angle. It's unheard of. Okay, so I went ahead and I took that base out of the clamps. I trimmed off the excess of that cannon and just gave it a quick sanding to make it nice and smooth. And here it is. But that's pretty much the profile of the table, and I'm really happy with that. Okay, so we're going to end the video where it is, and we'll add a third part where we go into the finishing process, which is just really simple, but also we'll go into details of how I installed these beautiful bow ties or butterflies or Dutchmans or whatever you want to call them as it's quite an interesting technique and it does require quite a few minutes to explain, so don't really want to squeeze it into this video as the details just won't be there. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, make sure you click that thumbs up button down below and also leave a comment. So if you've got any questions or just comments on the build so far, leave it down below and I'd be stoked to see it. Now, if you like what I do here on YouTube and you would like to possibly send a few dollars my way and help support the show, let this channel grow and all of that, there's a couple of ways you can do that. So over my website, there is 2 ways to do it. There is the shop for the plans, so you can actually go over to the plans side of the website and download woodworking plans and add a donation to that. So you can get a Roubo workbench, a router table, some templates, there's a drinks table, there's quite a few little things on there. So on all of those you can download them, add a donation, and that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is just over on the donations page itself. So you can donate a small dollar amount to a large dollar amount, completely up to you what you want to do. And you can also actually make recurring payments there as well. So if you clicked on other/recurring, you could make a small dollar amount donation every month and help support the show. Now, if you didn't know, George Woodshop is about to move to a much larger premises for the next 5 years in September, and that's going to cost a fair bit of money getting everything set up and over there. So any donations that do come through is going to go directly to that move and helping this channel and this workshop just grow into a much bigger thing. So anything you can do is greatly appreciated. Obviously, I'm not telling you to do it. It's just if you feel like it, it is always appreciated. Anyway, that's it. So I'll see you in the next video.